First Things, episode number 64.
I seem to be lost.
And so you're working around the clock so you don't take time for yourself to feel like an actual human being.
I used to feel like no matter how hard I worked, I was just spinning my wheels.
Trying to be perfect, we try to have everything in place at one point in time, and we can't.
Hello, my friends. Welcome back to First Things, the podcast dedicated to practical productivity based on modern research. My name is Brandon Vaughn, and it's my goal to help you apply productive solutions to your life to help you live with less stress, greater passion, and amazing results. So good to have you back with me today as we are continuing trekking along in our study on Essentialism. This week, we are on Chapter 12 of Greg McKeown's book. This chapter is about the Uncommit, win big by cutting your losses. And we will get started in that in just a few minutes. If you haven't picked up this book, I would highly encourage you to do so. Any of the things that we cover on this podcast are things that I highly, highly recommend to you. I would definitely recommend you put this in your library, give it to people that you care about. You can find a link to this book at my website at firstthingsproductivity.com/64. Go all the way down to the bottom of the page. You will see it there. But you can go straight to Barnes & Nobles or Amazon or iTunes and find it there. Would definitely recommend that you pick up this book. So a few things as we get going today. We are about to be closing up our first ever listener survey. And as of today, let me look, we have 29 responses. So this is awesome. I am so thankful for all of you who have taken the time to respond to this survey. I had hoped to get up to around 100 people responding to this survey, but that's just the statistical geek in me that likes to have large sample sizes so it can be representative. And 30 is not bad, but 100 would even be better. So if you had any inclination of doing this survey, I'm still going to keep it up for about another week. You can go to firstthingsproductivity.com/survey. Remember, things is plural. It's only about 10 questions, take you about 5 to 10 minutes, completely anonymous, and then I will shut up about this and quit reminding you about it every single week. Then I'll probably through Thanksgiving, I'll take a couple of weeks and just really look and think about the responses, and probably in some episode in December, I will report back to you some of the things that you guys are telling me about, some of the things that you like, some of the things that you might like to be changed, and I just want to give some serious thought to some of the things that you are telling me. Many of you have kept responding to me, emailing me. I still owe a few of you some emails, so I will get that to you hopefully before you hear this message. You can email me at brandonvaughn.com. V is in Victor, AUGHN. I always say that because, as I said in a previous episode, Vaughn can be spelled different ways. Of course, the way I say it could sound like Bond, like B-O-N-D, like James Bond, Brandon Vaughn, 007 agent. No, it's more like Stevie Ray Vaughan, the guitarist, but Stevie Ray has an extra A in his name, and I don't. V-A-U-G-H-N. Me at brandonvaughn.com. That reaches me directly. I don't have any assistants working for me. It would be great if I did. You email me, you go directly to my inbox, and I have all my computers set up to where I can access that, even my phone. So if you email me, I will see it. You can also reach me by Twitter, Facebook, all this kind of stuff. But I've really been enjoying talking to you, all of you. Thank you so much for writing me, telling me how things are going, things that you're dealing with, your life. It matters a lot to me. It really does. I think this has been one of the missing elements for me so long in the show, is just really having this communication with you guys. It makes it that much more real to me that this is more of a conversation that I'm having with you, not a lecture. And there's nothing wrong with lectures, but I've done that for all my life, and I would rather do more communication, more dialogue, if you will. And many of you have done that for me by emailing me. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Feel free to keep doing that. As I got on my soapbox last week, I'm one of the few people that you might listen to on a productivity podcast, especially with some of the numbers that I have, which isn't tremendously big as some of the ones that are in the top 10, but I value your feedback. I value your correspondence, and I will write you back. Sometimes I get really busy in my week, in my work, get a little bit bogged down, and sometimes it takes a few days or longer to respond, but I will. And I've been doing a lot better about that. And I definitely welcome that. You won't get any assistant, you won't get any sales pitch from me, but definitely something that I highly value. I think Vanessa Van Edwards' 30-day course on mastering your people skills is wrapping up now. You might still be able to catch some of those free episodes at creativelive.com. This is a course that I would definitely recommend that you buy and consider purchasing and working through. As I work through it, it will definitely spill over into some of our episodes here because I just really found the information valuable. Love her research base for everything that she talks about. So before we begin, I know hopefully you don't get tired of me talking about my Essentials report card. I won't always be telling you this. Definitely during our series on Essentialism, I want to let you know how I'm doing. So how am I doing? Well, my writing has continued to progress. Have not missed one day since we started talking about this. Still a few days where I would have to push off writing until the very end of the day. And I found that I don't really work very good there. So many of those times I will just settle for 5 or 10 minutes of writing and then just stop and go to bed. But at least I kept writing. And the consistency part is the primary thing that I've been pushing myself about. So I would give myself an A in that category. My music has been pretty good this week. I've worked a lot on this one particular song and really trying to understand how to mix it and master it. And by the way, if there's anyone out there who's listening to me who does that for a living, that does some kind of mixing of music and mastering, and especially if you've done some before in the past and done it in rock or country styles of music, would love to talk to you and even consider outsourcing some of this to someone to help me mix this. There was one guy that I've watched a lot on the internet who gets a lot of great advice, and I actually looked up his information about how to mix or letting him mix for me. And wow, his services were greatly expensive, and I will probably just do it myself. I've done it before myself, but many times when you hear the same song day after day after day, you start losing perspective. But I've been doing pretty good. I've got to work on more of my vocals and see if I can't finish up this one song in the next week. I may actually play it for you in our next episode, although I'm not sure if I'll have vocals for it yet, but I may play it instrumentally for you just so you can hear what I've been working on all these weeks as I've been talking about that. So I'd probably give myself a B+, maybe an A- on that. Sleep, been doing pretty good the last few days, getting at least 7 hours, sometimes 7.5. A couple of nights, I'm not sure if I just wasn't feeling very good, got a little bit over 8 hours of sleep, which is a little bit unusual for me and really didn't want to wake up. So I don't know what's going on there, but been doing a lot better with that. Eating, exercise, doing good with the eating more or less, trying to get off of all sugars right now. That's been my primary goal. I've started taking multivitamins after I've read a lot of really interesting research about how we need vitamins and how many times we've been made afraid of vitamins in our lives and overdosing on them and things like that, but how really good they are and how we need a lot more than usually what's recommended that we take. And my body didn't really like that at first. It seemed to be reacting against it. I was tired a lot, but then after about a week of just sticking it out, it seems like, wow, I'm seeing kind of a big difference in taking that. Exercise could do a little bit better in that realm, but mostly I've been doing fairly well. And this is all things that are what I would consider, based on Stephen Covey's terminology, my important but non-urgent things. And obviously family, I have a daughter, all this stuff would be tied in there as well. But these are things that technically I could just not do for months and years at a time, and it starts building up against me. Certainly I could talk about how I'm doing with the Essentialism in my work, and that's very merited and something that we need to be applying as well. But these are some things that really resonate with me and make me feel better. My essentials, the vital few things that I really want to make sure that I do. Okay, so let's get into our chapter for today, which is the Uncommit. The book starts off with a quote by Josh Billings, who says that half of the troubles of this life can be traced to saying yes too quickly and not saying no soon enough. Greg starts off with something called the sunk cost bias. And this is a terminology that's been used a lot in econometrics and psychology to talk about this tendency that we have to continue doing something after we've invested either time or money or energy into it. Maybe all three of those. The minute that we invest any part of our lives into it, we are less likely to want to just drop it to maybe go towards something better. So the sunk cost bias is basically when we realize that we have spent a lot of time, energy, or money into something that we cannot get back. And because of this, we enter into this very vicious cycle that we want to not give up on it, that we want to see it through, that we want to try to recoup in some way by sticking it out, some of the things that we've invested in it. The fact is that the more we invest in something, often it's much, much harder just to simply let it go. I don't know if you've ever experienced this with something like as simple as a movie, that you go and see a terrible movie. You pay a very expensive ticket to get in to see the movie. You pay very expensive, unhealthy snacks that cost maybe more than the movie itself. You go in, and after 10 minutes of the movie, you hate it. And you think, I just want to go. But then you start thinking, well, I spent all this money on the ticket, and I spent all this money on the snacks. I guess I should just stick it out. And many times we don't even maybe voice that in our heads, just on this subconscious level. We are talking to ourselves and saying, don't be wasteful, just go ahead and just stick it out. Same could be true of car repairs, that you've already put so much money. I always hate this when I have a car that I've had for, say, 3 or 4 years. I've put a lot of money into it, and then I start having these repairs. And then there's a very expensive repair, and I start thinking, well, I don't know if I should pay this. Maybe I should just trade this car in. And then if I go ahead and make that repair, and then 2 months later, if I have another expensive repair, I will feel this urge to keep putting repairs into this car because, wow, Brandon, you just spent $3,000 last month on this. You've got to keep trying to resurface this car to not lose all of that money you just sunk into it. But in that case, usually I'm pretty wise after the second or third time and just say, I've got to get rid of this car. I don't care how much money I've spent in repairs already. I've just got to get rid of this thing. Home renovations are very similar in that sense. People waiting for a bus or a train that is late or never comes instead of just getting a cab and going somewhere is very similar to this. Also, from a relationship aspect, there are some people maybe even listening to me that have been involved or are involved in very toxic relationships that suck the very life out of you. And it's very hard for people to just turn that away, to go the opposite directions, to end this type of thing, because there's so much invested in this. I noticed this habit in myself about a year ago, I think this was, maybe 2 years ago. My daughter was really into these arcade games where it was the claw games. And she would spend an enormous amount of money sometimes to get one of those little stuffed animals out there. So I decided to help her get something. And I started studying these things, watching YouTube videos, anything I could to try to figure out what's the strategy here. Is there any signs to know the better claw games to play and which ones of them are more rigged? And I remember this one instance at a fair that we were at, and there was this one stuffed animal she just really, really wanted. So I started playing this game, and the more that we played it, the more the expectations were there. Oh, you almost got it. And I think I played that game until I spent maybe $50 or $60 and finally got that. $50 or $60 for a stuffed animal that probably I could have bought at $5 at Walmart. That is this sunk cost effect. There was so much writing on this, so much I'd already put into this, and I just could not turn away. And people will spend an enormous amount of money sometimes on these games because they can't give up on these types of things. Here's what Greg says. Have you ever continued to invest time or effort in a non-essential project instead of cutting your losses? Have you ever continued to pour money into an investment that wasn't panning out instead of walking away? Have you ever kept plodding down a dead end because you could not admit, I shouldn't have pursued this direction in the first place? Ever been stuck in a cycle of throwing good money after bad? A non-essentialist can't break free of traps like these. An essentialist has the courage and confidence to admit his or her mistakes and uncommit, no matter the sunk cost. So a non-essentialist asks, why stop now when I've already invested so much in this project? But an essentialist is going to ask, if I weren't already invested in this project, how much would I invest in it now? A non-essentialist thinks, if I just keep trying, I can make this work. But an essentialist thinks, what else could I do with this time or money if I pulled the plug now? Non-essentialist hates admitting to mistakes, but an essentialist is comfortable with cutting losses. So Greg gives many, many great strategies for avoiding these type of commitment traps, these sunk cost biases that we can find ourselves in our lives. The first one that he suggests is to beware and be on the lookout for the endowment effect. And the endowment effect basically is this strange tendency in our lives that we tend to value things that we own that are ours in some sense more than things that we don't own. Now, one classic example is Daniel Kahneman, who is a professor, Nobel Prize-winning researcher, and they did this experiment where they gave coffee mugs to about half of the subjects in an experiment. The first group was asked how much they would be willing to sell their mug for, while the second group was asked how much they would be willing to pay for it. And what ended up happening is that the people that owned it were willing to sell it for about $5, while those that didn't own it were willing to pay about $2.25 for it. So basically, the people that owned it more than doubled the price in their minds of what this mug was worth. Now, one of my pet peeves, something that I hate doing, I just break out in hives. I would rather go get shots at the doctor than go to yard sales. I just detest yard sales, garage sales, anything like that, unless I could find something like a Fender Telecaster or an old Mellotron. If you don't know what a Mellotron is, well, I won't bore you with that. But anyway, music gear. I've never really found any place that had music gear except from one time, and the prices were so incredibly outrageous. I'm sitting there thinking I could go online and pay $400 less than what you're asking for to get better than what you're offering right now. But this is a tendency always at yard sales, is that the people that are selling things are always pricing things way more than what they're really worth. And then the people that come to these yard sales are always wanting to nickel and dime everything, because to them, some of these things are of interest, but they're not that valuable. And I just really grew tired of participating in them because, okay, here's my prized possession golf clubs that I'm going to sell for $300. And someone comes along and says, I'll give you $10 for it. I'm $10. What are you talking about? I'm not going to give you these $300 clubs for $10. Well, here's a quarter. I'll give it to you for a quarter. A quarter? Why don't you go stick that quarter somewhere? I just get so incredibly frustrated with these things. But this is the endowment effect. This idea that I own this, therefore it is incredibly valuable to me. And think about your life and your possessions. So we're talking about possessions right now. Think about your bookshelf. Do you have books on your bookshelf that are basically dust collectors? Books that you haven't read in maybe 5-10 years? Maybe books that you bought and never read and they still stay on your shelf today. Clothes that are in your closet that you bought and never wore. Maybe that you used to wear and you haven't worn them in 2 or 3 years. Well, why are they still in your closet? Why don't you just go get rid of them? And on a practical level, that's a pretty good thing to consider doing, is to simplify your life and get rid of things. But the reason why many of us don't do that is because we become obsessed with how valuable things are that we own. Now, we can tie this over into the non-essential activities in our lives, and we do the same things. The non-essential activities, if we've invested a lot of time and energy and money into them, we will have a tendency to put more value on them than they really are. And thus, we have a harder time turning them off and uncommitting to them. So how do we get past this? Well, Greg says, pretend you don't own it yet. He goes on and says, Tom Stafford describes a simple antidote to the endowment effect. Instead of asking, how much do I value this item? We should ask, if I did not own this item, how much would I pay to obtain it? We can do the same for opportunities and commitment. Don't ask, how will I feel if I miss out on this opportunity? But rather ask, if I did not have this opportunity, how much would I be willing to sacrifice in order to obtain it? Similarly, we can ask, if I wasn't already involved in this project, how hard would I work to get on it? So doing this kind of reversal in our minds will help us uncommit to things and get past this sunk cost bias. It will help us get past this overestimation of the value of something in our lives. Think about the things that you are involved in right now and ask yourself, if I wasn't already involved in this, how much would I fight? How much would I ask? How much would I beg and plead? How much of my time and my energy and maybe even my money would I put in to be able to be involved in this project or this opportunity? I think if we ask that, there are many, many things that get dropped off very quickly. I think I've told you this in the past, but one thing that I do, which maybe sounds kind of strange because I do this even in my work, I will often ask myself, would I be willing to pay someone to do this? Now, yes, I'm getting paid to do this. Someone is paying me to do this task. But do I love this task so much that I would actually be willing to pay someone the privilege of being able to do this? Now, a lot of things in work, honestly, the answer is no. And this helps me to prioritize or to push away from this overvaluation of things. Because I'll be honest with you, and maybe I'm just strange, and I am probably kind of strange. I am a statistician after all, doing a podcast over productivity. So how strange can you be? But many times there are a handful of things that I do in just work that I might honestly pay to do because I enjoy it that much. Now, granted, I don't think I would pay what I get paid to do it. I might only want to pay $10 or $50 to do something like that. But there are a few things that I would do like that. Now, when I find those, then I try to prioritize those and push those because those are a really incredible passion to me. Things like my writing, things like my music, which I don't make any money off of. I enjoy it so much. I would actually pay. In fact, I do pay to do that. I pay money all the time in equipment and programs and things like that. I pay a lot in time devoted to actually set aside 30 minutes a day to do my writing. Same thing with this podcast. Would I pay to do this podcast? Well, I do pay. I pay all the time. I pay for space to put the podcast. I pay for web pages. I pay for equipment to talk into, like right now. I pay in terms of time that I take away from other things to be able to record these podcast episodes. But these are really important questions to ask yourself. Look at your life from the minute you get up in the morning to the minute you go to bed at night, and look at all the different things you do with your friends, your family, your work, your hobbies, anything like that, and ask yourself how much time, energy, commitment, money, how much would you plead and ask and beg to be a part of whatever it is that you do? And if you can't say that you would, what I'm not saying is that you should automatically just drop it because maybe that is your job. That is maybe nearly 100% of your job. Well, that might mean that you need to find something else to do. That may mean that you need to find those things that you would do in your job and try to prioritize that instead. It doesn't mean that you totally neglect everything that you do in your work. It's more of a matter of priority. And so if there are some things that you really don't enjoy doing, things that don't resonate with you at all, then maybe it's more of a matter of trying to get out of those things, to prioritize other things instead. Another suggestion Greg gives is to get over our fear of waste. And he quotes from a study that was done from Hal Arkes, who's a professor of psychology at Ohio State University. And he did this study with some college students and basically gave them some options for a vacation. It says, assume that you have spent $100 on a ticket for a weekend ski trip to Michigan. Several weeks later, you buy a $50 ticket for a weekend ski trip to Wisconsin. You think you will enjoy this Wisconsin ski trip more than the Michigan ski trip for some reason. As you are putting your newly purchased Wisconsin ticket in your wallet, you notice that the Michigan ski trip and the Wisconsin ski trip are on the same weekend. It's too late to sell or return either ticket. You must choose which to use. So you have the $100 ticket to Michigan, which you don't think you're going to enjoy as much as the cheaper $50 ticket to Wisconsin, and you're going to be out the money. You've got to choose. Now, what's interesting is that when this person did this research on actual people, college students, they asked them, which ski trip will you go on? More than half said that they would go on the more expensive Michigan trip, even though they knew they would enjoy it less. They had a very faulty reasoning, which was that using the cheaper ticket would be wasting more money than using the expensive ticket. It's natural not to want to let go of what we wasted on a bad choice, but when we don't, we doom ourselves to keep wasting even more. This is a tendency that some of us have that we've got to really be on the lookout for and fight. This tendency to not want to admit failures. This tendency that failure is tied into our identity as a person, and we cannot afford that luxury of a failure to admit that we have failed, because then who are we as a person? Our personality, our whole personhood is based on this faulty perception of perfectionism, which is a lie and a misconception to begin with. We've got to be willing to admit failure in order to really begin to embrace success. Success is only going to come through failures. We've said this so many times on previous episodes. True success in any shape of the meaning of that word is going to be built upon the foundation of failures. I can't tell you anything that I know of extremely successful people in whatever field they're in who haven't had some of the worst failures as well, whether it be in music or athletics or in business or in technology or in medicine or in psychology. In fact, some of our most profound inventions have usually come from the failures that we've had in our lives. People have had tremendous failures, and out of that failure has often come the discovery of something radically life-changing. So if you're like me, and you would probably say, well, gosh, I spent $100 on this Michigan trip, and although I would probably like the Wisconsin trip a lot better, I can't see wasting this $100. We've got to just own up to the fact I messed up, and I'm going to lose out on $100, but I'm going to choose the path that is more resonating with me. There's no shame in admitting that I've made a mistake. It's not who I am as a person. I think it's wiser, even more beneficial, if you will, that we actually have the insight to know that we've messed up. I'm much more concerned in my life when I don't even know that I'm messing up. I've learned to be very thankful when I actually have the insight to see that I've messed up now. And I know that maybe sounds strange, especially to some of my perfectionism friends that are listening to me right now, of which I am right there in the middle of you as well. But I've learned in my life that it is like a breath of fresh air to realize and to know that I've made a mistake, and therefore I can correct it, or I can choose a path that resonates with me. Much, much better than going on some path of something that is not a resonator in my life, and I don't even know that I'm heading in the wrong direction the entire time. Another thing that Greg suggests is to get a neutral second opinion. This is always good advice. If you just really don't know what to do in your life and you don't know how to deal with certain things, it's always helpful to get people that aren't involved in that process, somebody that can give you a neutral second opinion. We've got to be aware of the status quo bias, which is basically just a bias that it's always been done this way, and therefore we just keep doing it. Well, other people in my work do it this way, so I'll just do it this way, or I've always done it this way. So we just go into this autopilot and never really think about what we should be doing in the first place. We need to stop making casual commitments where we say yes to things that we don't really want to do, that we're going through life and people hit us randomly throughout our day, and we commit to things that really don't resonate with us. And we've got to have the courage to go back and to say no to some of those things, or to do what Greg says, to just pause before you speak. You know, there's an ancient Proverbs that I've always loved that says that even a foolish man will be mistaken for a wise man if he just keeps his mouth shut. And I try to remember that often when I'm involved in things and sit there and think, I just want to talk and talk about things, even though I typically have been more introverted in my life. But there are certain things that you get me on and I want to talk a lot about. And I often think, okay, maybe it's better to be silent here and not to just explode all over everybody my ignorance sometimes on a particular topic. Greg says, it might sound obvious, but pausing for just 5 seconds before offering your services can greatly reduce the possibility of making a commitment that you will regret. Before the words, that sounds great, I'd love to, before those words fly out of your mouth, ask yourself, is this essential? If you've already made a casual commitment you're regretting, find a nice way to worm your way out. Simply apologize and tell the person that when you made the commitment, you didn't fully realize what it would entail. Such great advice. Just pause. When somebody comes to you and says, oh, we're really looking for someone to help us work on this particular project, not really sure what we're going to do, before you come out and say, oh, what about me? Or if they say, hey, by the way, what are you doing? Do you think you might want to work on this? And you just blurt out, wow, that sounds great, would love to. But then 10 minutes later, half an hour later, you're sitting there thinking, why on earth did I say yes to this? I don't want to do this. A simpler thing to do is to, in that moment, when that person is asking you that or coming to you in that, just smile at them and maybe tilt your head sideways and just think. You can think in 5 seconds something that would take you maybe a week to write out by hand. Your thinking is phenomenal. And just in 5 seconds, have this inner dialogue within you. Is this essential to me? Is this really what I need to say yes to? Because I realize there are a few things I need to say yes to, and mostly what I need to do is say no to things. Is this one of those things I should be saying yes to? And literally, you can have that entire conversation in just 5 seconds while you're sitting there smiling at that person. Then have the courage to either say, I'm sorry, I would love to, but I can't commit to this right now. or if it's a resonator for you, then dive in and do it. We've got to get over the fear of missing out. And one of the things that Greg mentions, a technique by Daniel Shapiro, who's a director at LinkedIn, something called the reverse pilot. And in the reverse pilot, you basically test whether removing an initiative or an activity will have any negative consequences. So think about in your life, if you quit doing certain things, what if I quit doing this? What's the impact? Are there any negative consequences to this? But start uncommitting in your life. That is the whole theme of this particular chapter, uncommit. So last week, well, let's say 2 weeks ago, we talked about how we can start eliminating the trivial many in our lives. The first step is to clarify. What are your essential things? What is your mission statement? Last week, we said you've got to learn to say no. You've got to dare to say no to some things in your life, the trivial many in your life, in order to give you the space and the breathing room to say yes to those vital few things in your life. And then this week, we're saying you've got to have the courage now to uncommit, to start going through and applying that no, and as a pair of scissors, start trimming out these areas in your life where you need to cut out things that are non-essential. Uncommit from things that you are committed to. Start pushing those things out of your lives and freeing up some space to breathe in your life. So with that, I think we will stop for today. It's been great hanging with you. Thank you for listening to me. If you have any comments for me, any questions, anything that you would like to discuss with me, feel free to write me, email me at me@brandonvaughn.com. As I said earlier in the episode, you will get me directly, a direct path to me. You can also reach me through Twitter and Facebook, although honestly, sometimes those messages get buried and I don't always see them. But feel free to do that. I try to get on there at least maybe once a day. Sometimes Twitter, I don't actually get on there, but every few days. I don't like to be limited to 140 characters or whatever it is. So often I will look at Facebook, but often I'm looking at Facebook because I'm following all sorts of stuff that interests me, music stuff. And I go on there and see what stuff they posted and try to see if anybody may have left me a message and maybe post some things as well if I get a chance. But email is a great way to catch me. Now we've got 2 more chapters in this whole part of the book that deals with eliminating things in our life. Next week we'll talk about edit, the invisible art, and then about limit, the freedom of setting boundaries. And then we're going to get into the last part of the book, which is executing, how we can make doing the vital few things almost effortless in our lives. And that will take us through the November month and probably a little bit into December if you're listening to me in real time. So I think that will do it for today. So until next time, remember this. We have this tendency in our lives to not give up on things that we've committed some time, energy, and money into. You've got to be on the lookout for this. You've got to be willing to make mistakes. Life is full of mistakes, and it's only in your mistakes that many times will open up the door to your greatest opportunities. So don't be afraid of your mistakes. Own up to them. And yes, if it costs you money and time, well, then be grateful that you've learned such a valuable lesson. It wasn't for waste. If you've learned anything from it, it wasn't a waste of time or money or energy. Treat your life as an experiment, as an education. And now move on, uncommitting from things that are not essential in your life. As always, embrace today with passion and intention, and don't die with your music still inside you.